Okay, I guess that we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining, and we're really excited to talk to you about the Catalyst Fellowship. I'm Lindsay and I am the office manager with Justice Catalyst. And with me is Jacob.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacob. I'm the Fellowship Director at the Justice Catalyst. I also work at the Systemic Justice Project at Harvard Law School. And we also have Jess.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica and I'm a Program Associate at Justice Catalyst and a Paralegal at Justice Catalyst Law. And I'll throw it over to Callie.
Hi everyone, I am Callie Wilson. I am a current Justice Catalyst Fellow at the Oakland City Attorney's Office.
Great, so just to kind of give you a quick overview of the agenda today, we're going to talk about the general Justice Catalyst approach, and then we'll talk about the logistics of the fellowship, and then we'll take questions at the end. So just some technical stuff. We can't see you or hear you, so your way of communicating with us is through the chat function, not the Q&A function, and we will answer all those questions at the end. And just a note, when you do type in a question, to put it on the all panelists and attendees function so that everybody can see it. So this is going to be recorded. So either this recording or one of our other webinar recordings will go up on the website. So we can go ahead and talk about Justice Catalyst. So we're actually two entities. First is Justice Catalyst and the other is Justice Catalyst Law. So Justice Catalyst was founded about 3 years ago, and we are a philanthropic advisor. And part of our work as a philanthropic advisor is that we support and administer fellowship programs, including this one. And Justice Catalyst Law was founded a little over a year ago, and that is our law firm. Our main activity is that we work with other nonprofits to do early stage case development. And kind of the common theme between Justice Catalyst and Justice Catalyst Law, both in the work that we do and the work that we support, is that everything encompasses some type of cross-disciplinary legal strategy from different fields of law and involved actors from different sectors of society. And a lot of this work is about dismantling discrimination, marginalization, and oppression on a broad scale, systemic level. We always give a example of one of our cases that really reflects our approach. So it's a case where we're applying commercial law to a social justice issue. So we partnered with a group of other nonprofits and the law firm Leaf Cabraser and filed a class action lawsuit in California against all of the insurance companies that underwrite commercial bail bonds. And we are alleging an antitrust conspiracy has inflated these premiums. So the idea is that the outcome of this case could have an impact of undercutting the profit and power of these really big companies, which would, have a big impact on society.
So that's
Oh no, go ahead, Jacob.
So that's some of the programmatic work that the Justice Catalyst does. And as Lindsay mentioned, Justice Catalyst Law does. There's also the Justice Catalyst Fellowship Program, and some fellowship projects may be connected to some of the programmatic work, but the vast majority are not connected to any of the programmatic work of the Justice Catalyst or the particular approaches we take. So we tell you that to give you some background, but not because you have to fit a fellowship project into our way of doing things necessarily. And so I'm now going to go on to give you some more background on our way of doing things and what we mean by that and how we think about the fellowship project more specifically. So I'm going to do that by talking about the other organization that I work in, the Systemic Justice Project, and some of those approaches, because we found that talking about that and how we think about legal education is a great entry to thinking about how we think about the legal profession and about the principles of the fellowship program more generally. So as I mentioned, I also work in the Systemic Justice Project, which is a project at Harvard Law School, and that project is mostly done through a couple different courses that I co-teach with Professor John Hanson. One of those courses is called Systemic Justice, the Systemic Justice course, and a one-line summary of that is that it's about power and inequality and the role of the law in legitimating them. In that course, we bring a mind sciences approach, which is what John's background is in law and mind sciences. And we look back to history at historical injustices, trying to understand how they were justified at the time, both within and outside the law, and bring that forward to try to understand injustices today and how they may be being justified and legitimated. So those past injustices, we go back to antebellum slavery and even back to the Crusades and everything in between. We also teach a course called the Justice Lab, and with some spin-off courses called the Legal Education Lab sometimes. And in that course, students in teams identify problems in the world that they want to be working on. And a big part of the goal of that course, by having students select their own problems, and not having any subject matter focus, it allows us to step back and think about the common causes underlying many of the problems we identify. An easy example I sometimes give of this is whether you care about workers' rights or the environment or 1,000 other issues, you have to care about money in politics. That's an obvious one where you have to kind of step back a level and think about how that's affecting it. But we think that's certainly true of money in politics, but it's also true of many other common causes. And so part of the goal of having students work on different problems is that they can cross-pollinate and think about the common causes and potentially common solutions underlying many of the problems out there in the world. The student work revolves around writing policy papers, preparing presentations for an annual conference. And a big part of those courses and of the systemic justice and justice catalyst approach generally is fostering collaborations. So that's at the micro level collaborations between students, but it's also collaborations between students and the many outside organizations or faculty, often from the clinical program, who pitch the problems to our students that they end up selecting, and across and between those different groups. Another aspect of the collaboration and a vital part of the approach, which is also true of this fellowship program, is the listening tour. So when students have identified a broad problem they want to work on, the first step is to identify a whole range of experts in that field to try to narrow down to a specific topic area. And those that we mean expert very broadly. So that includes academics and researchers studying the problem, but it also includes legal practitioners working on the problem in a variety of ways. It includes activists who are trying to address the problem. It includes people with direct experience of the problem themselves. And so only by going on the listening tour can we work out where we can have value in working on a policy paper. One of the many ongoing collaborations we have is with the Justice Catalyst in a whole variety of ways, including the fact that I sit in both organizations. So a little bit more about the shared Systemic Justice Project and Justice Catalyst approach, again, through the prism of legal education, but using that to think about the legal profession as well. because after all, the only thing that unites everyone in the legal profession is that they have gone through legal education. There's not really anything else. So I'm going to talk about legal education, and I put this guy up on the slide. That's Christopher Columbus Langdell, who is really the founder of modern legal education the way it is now, with the case method and the Socratic method and so on. And that's as a reminder that when I talk about legal education, I'm talking really about the kind of core of legal education that he really developed, that's most prominent in black letter law courses and 1L courses, especially in many law schools, but varies tremendously from professor to professor, from course to course, and it definitely doesn't apply to a lot of clinics and other aspects of legal education. But we think in many law schools, at least, there's still a core there. And we think that built into legal education are 4 presumptions. The first is that legal education is primarily about what the law is. So when you come to law school, you come to learn what the law is and how it works. That's the basic orienting principle. The second presumption is that we think that legal education tends to presume the legitimacy of the law. So if you're sitting in a course learning the law, you're not learning it as this alien kind of weird system that's just there. Implicitly, in many courses at least, the message is this is basically a legitimate functioning system that we're studying because it's pretty good. And even if the professor has a law reform agenda or thinks that some cases were wrongly decided, basically we're studying it as if it's a legitimate system. Third, legal education tends to be taught within categories and silos. So the broadest categories and silos are property law, contract law, tort law, the different courses. But then within those, there are subcategories. So, in a tort law class, you may study negligence for a while, and then you're studying strict liability for a while, and then they're subdivided and subdivided and subdivided. And most of legal education is within one of those categories at a time, with much less time devoted, if any, to thinking about the law more broadly. And finally, legal education, we think, tends to be individualist in both form and substance. So in terms of form, the most of the time in these big Langdell type courses, you're sitting in a desk by yourself, you're surrounded by other people, but you're at some fundamental level alone. You're taking notes, you're preparing for an exam that you'll take by yourself, and that's basically what you're doing. It's also individualist in terms of substance. So there's many different ways of thinking about the law and learning about the law. One of them is as dispute resolution between individual parties, and that's the approach that we think is most dominant in legal education. So if you're studying primarily appellate court opinions with 2 individual parties, maybe it's a class action, or maybe one of them is a group entity like a corporation or a union, but basically you're looking at individual parties, and that's the approach. So we at the Systemic Justice Project and at the Catalyst try to subvert those what we see as those presumptions of legal education that filter into the profession as well. So instead of starting with what law is, we start with problems in the world and try and identify those problems and think about all the ways that law connects to those problems. But then not just law, also looking outside of the law to other potential solutions. But even within the law, almost any problem you identify will not just touch one area of law. You'll have to look across doctrines and between different doctrinal categories to really understand why the situation is the way it is. Almost by definition, then, we're questioning the legitimacy of the existing law and existing legal doctrine. By studying areas that are connected to problems, presumably we could be doing better there, and there's room for improvement and change. Finally, thirdly, by starting with problems, you're almost necessarily looking outside of the individual categories and silos of law, as I indicated. So any one problem you identify or any one client you have is going to be affected by problems in many different areas of law. So you're looking beyond those silos. And really a sum for all of this is that we try to be systemic. So that's, again, in form and in substance. So substantively in all those other ways. And then in form by fostering teamwork, fostering collaboration between different types of groups. So whether that's between students or whether that's between different types of lawyers and legal service providers in a way that we'll come to discuss. So that's a bit about the approach generally. And that kind of way of thinking about legal education, the law, and the legal profession feeds into the priorities for the fellowship program. So to run through those, and as a caveat, I'm going to have a bunch of bullet points on this slide. You should not think of this as a checklist by any means. These are the things that we get excited about and that guide us in this fellowship, but there's probably no single project that ticks all of these, and projects are kind of address these priorities in different ways. So don't feel you have to hit them all, but these are things to be thinking about. So our fellowship projects are project-based and problem-centric primarily. So most of the applications start with a problem that the applicant has identified in the world and that the fellowship project is designed to at least begin to address. And most of our focus when evaluating projects is on the projects themselves. That's where we start. We look at the project. We, of course, also look at your ability as a fellow to carry out that project. And we also look at other aspects of fellows, including background and other types of experiences that we think are relevant. And we do prioritize diversity of many different types, including of fellows and of projects. But projects is where we start first. We are especially excited by projects that we find novel, and that often means working across silos in one way or another. One way of summarizing a lot of these bullet points is we are most excited about funding projects that we think are otherwise hardest to find funding for, whether that's from other fellowships or in other ways. And you'll see how you'll see what I mean by that. So one type of project that we think is difficult to get funded is a project that is systemic, that is aiming perhaps a broad scale change or to take on powerful interests. Often powerful interests have law firms, and those law firms are less likely to fund projects that are going after those powerful interests. I think there's also less interest for many funders in projects that are aiming at broad scale change. So partly for that reason, those are the projects that we're most excited about. We look to sustainability of projects beyond the fellowship term. There's all different ways that could happen. It could be a way that you as a fellow could be hired by a host organization, or it could be that the host organization is in a position to take on the work. It could be just that you're piloting something that will create some replicable approaches or materials for others to continue with. But if not all fellowship projects meet this, but if there's a way for it to be sustainable, that's a plus in our view. I should say something about the novel. It's not like every project has to reinvent the wheel. You can think about it being novel because it's bringing an approach from one organization to another organization, or from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, or is just making some tweak in something. It doesn't have to be a kind of a completely brand new thing, but we are excited by novelty. We are excited about funding projects that are not necessarily traditionally legal. So many of our projects are different types of lawyering, whether it's impact litigation or direct representation, or any other form of lawyering. But we're also happy to support projects that are at non-legal hosts and that are aiming to make change in other ways. So an example of that is we would be happy to support a project, say, that's building out a database of police misconduct is something that we've looked at in the past, and that there are different groups working on. If you're the person building out that database, there's no reason you have to have a law degree specifically to do that. But we would still be happy to have a fellow doing that kind of work, and many other types of work that aren't necessarily traditionally legal. We're especially excited about projects at non-traditional host organizations. Again, many of our projects are at traditional host organizations, but we get excited when we see it's maybe a new organization or a small, scrappy organization where you may be the first lawyer on staff. The type of organization that isn't traditionally taking law graduate fellows, and also non-traditional in other ways. So it's easiest for us to place fellows at 501c3s. That's just mechanically easier. But we always work to find ways to place people at other types of organizations as well. And those, in fact, we're especially excited about. So whether that's government agencies of different types, and we have actually a special fellowship that we're partnering on with Public Rights Project that Callie will talk about in a little bit. It could be also at a private plaintiffs firm that has a strong public interest mission and where the project is very public interest defined. We could have fellowships hosted there, at unions, at public defenders' offices that are not 501c3s. So really any kind of organization that you can think of, we'd be open to thinking about a fellowship hosted there as well. Another type of project that we think is difficult to get support for is a project that you have an idea or kind of you've started working towards but haven't fully fleshed out. And that's our in development or perspective projects. And we want to be able to help you get there from the kind of initial ideas stage through to a full application. And we designed our application process to accomplish that, specifically the prospectus aspect, which Jessica's going to be talking about in a little bit. Most of our projects are US domestic, and almost all of them have some kind of nexus to the US. So it's not the case that a project has to be either based or focused here. So we have projects, we have a fellow based in Mexico right now. We have a project where the fellow is based in the US, but is working on multinational corporations, including a lot that's happening outside the US. So we certainly will consider projects outside the US, but most of the Catalyst work is US focused. And so that's where most of our fellows are, and likely will continue to be. But if you're not, but you should still feel very free to submit a prospectus for fellowships that we based elsewhere or focused elsewhere as well, and we will certainly consider them. And something I want to offer a reminder about at this point is the importance of the listening tour, especially for some of these approaches. So if you're trying something new, novel, into silo, aiming at broad scale change, taking on powerful interests, it's especially important to identify who you want to reach out to and reach out to them as part of developing the fellowship project. That helps to make sure that it's not replicating something unnecessarily that's already being done somewhere else. And even more importantly, that it's not somehow doing more harm than good. When you're taking these risks to do novel broad scale change, there's always a risk that you'll end up doing more harm than good, and the listening tour can help you identify some of those risks and design the project to minimize that chance. We're very, very comfortable with risk of failure, trying some strategy that may not work. It's a long shot, but it may be worth trying, and that could be your fellowship project, and that's great. That's worth doing. We're obviously less comfortable with a project that may end up hurting the people it's trying to help. So listening tour is one of the steps to try and reduce that risk. So that's a kind of an overview of our priorities. I'm now going to turn over to Jessica, who'll talk about the timeline and some of the stages of the fellowship.
Thanks, Jacob. So I'm going to be going over the fellowship timeline. So we do have a two-stage application process. The first stage is the prospectus. You can submit that via our website anytime up to October 13th, which is in 10 days. We encourage you to apply as soon as possible, and you can submit any number of prospectuses if you'd like. The prospectus is optional but highly recommended. The final application may be submitted anytime from now to December 1st. This part is required. We do make decisions early, so it is worth applying as early as possible. We do interviews on a rolling basis. We'll select applicants for that and have made final decisions by February 1st. Fellowships are primarily a one-year commitment, but with the potential to renew another year. Sometimes we'll commit a fellow to 2 years, but generally fellowships are a one-year thing, and we'll reach out halfway through the year to discuss renewal opportunities. So that's the broad timeline. Next, I'll be going over the actual prospectus and what that'll look like. So the goal of the prospectus is twofold. One goal is for us to work with you on your proposal, and the second is to give you an indication of your likelihood of success without you having to complete a full application. So we will respond to all the prospectuses or prospecti. The responses can be something like, this is great, we'd love to see a full application, or this might not be a good fit, but you can go ahead and submit a full application anyway. In some cases, if you've submitted multiple ideas, we'll let you know which ones we're most excited about. And we can also let you know people or host organizations that might be worth reaching out to discuss your project even further. While you're crafting your prospectus, we do want to encourage you to keep things brief. Obviously, you can go into as much detail as you want, but you can also be as brief as writing like a single sentence or even fleshing it out as much as possible. Some optional elements you might want to include are a statement describing the problem, your approach, your theory of change, why this problem in particular is underfunded, and conversely, what models and analogs are currently out there. If you want to include some more details about your skills, experience, your connections to the problem, you can also include those. And some suggestions for your listening tour. So people that you've already talked to while developing this project, or people that you'd like to approach to continue developing this project. And this is one area that we can also help you with in terms of connecting with other organizations and people. We also have a box for additional project ideas. Jacob has said this before, but if you think of the prospectus as something like half-baked, this box is for ideas that are quarter-baked or even less developed. And a reason to submit in this box is that the idea might be more exciting to us than your main idea, and we'll let you know then, and you might end up applying with that. We also have various project ideas ourselves, so if you put something in there that we've already thought about, we might be able to connect you with more people who can help you develop that project. There is no downside to submitting this box. We love reading about all your ideas, so please feel free to submit in that area as well. We'll ask for a resume, and the deadline for this, as we said earlier, is October 13th, but we do encourage you to submit early. So next, we'll have the final application. So the final application will look a lot similar to the prospectus, but perhaps more in depth. You'll need to include some summary info, or rather contact information, a project description, which is a bit longer than your prospectus. This one's like 1,000 to 3,000 words. At this stage, you will need a host commitment letter, but if you don't have a host, you can indicate that on your application, and we'll potentially be able to help. Don't let the fact that you don't have a host stop you from applying. Apply anyway, and if we're interested in the project, we could potentially help you find one. But I guess the norm is still that you'll have a host at that point in the process. Again, we'll ask for your resume, and we don't require letters of recommendation, but please feel free to submit if you'd like. There's a tab on our webpage for where you can submit those directly. There's also a box here that'll let us know if you submitted a prospectus, and the deadline for the final application is December 1st. But as we said earlier, the earlier the better. So next, after the final application is submitted, we'll have the final interview, or the interviews and then the final decisions. The interviews will be done via Zoom, and we'll take some time afterwards to make our final decisions, and we're aiming to get back decisions all by February 1st. So now I'm going to turn it over to Callie, who will discuss project ideas.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So this is a part of the discussion where I'll do a little bit of overlapping with what Jacob was already talking about in terms of what we're looking for, but talking about things that Justice Catalyst would be excited to see. And to start out, I want to just make the broad disclaimer that Justice Catalyst is really excited to hear new ideas, to be surprised by projects. So nothing that I mentioned should preclude you from suggesting whatever you're thinking of, even if it doesn't fit into any of the categories that I am about to describe. That said, if you're looking for ideas of things that Justice Catalyst has found persuasive in the past, definitely a great idea to look at the Justice Catalyst website. You can see what current and former fellows have been doing and projects that Justice Catalyst has found to be tempting to fund before. And then there's some broad categories that Catalyst would be really interested in funding. Those can include new models for enforcement, either through private enforcement mechanisms or local and state government enforcement, radical approaches to standard problems. For instance, to economic justice or criminal justice work, things that don't necessarily just involve suing the government to achieve a change in policy. And then I think I mentioned at the beginning that my project is a government project, and so it is a good time to discuss in more detail what Jacob mentioned, which is a new fellowship that Justice Catalyst has launched in partnership with Public Rights Project for people who are interested in state and local government host organizations. You can find out more about that program on the Justice Catalyst website. There's a tab under fellowships for state and local projects. And there's actually a similar but slightly different prospectus and full application form that you'll be able to fill out if you look for more information there. And so finally, all these ideas could be things you could pursue, and if you're not sure, just feel free to submit a prospectus with what you have.
Thanks, Kelly. So over to to Lindsay, sorry. Oh, Lindsay, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So if, after this webinar, you find that, maybe the fellowship isn't a great fit for you for whatever reason, you are still absolutely welcome to send us an email, and there are other opportunities to connect with us. We do fund research positions. We may be hiring in the future. We sponsor and support events. We sometimes just connect people to other organizations, not necessarily through a fellowship. So please feel free to reach out to us.
Great. So that's what we have. I see that we're on the slide. You can see our contact information. Feel free to reach out to look at. There's an info sheet on our website with a lot of this information. There's also an FAQ there that answers some frequently asked questions. And you can email me. That's jlipton@justicecatalyst.org, or fellowships@justicecatalyst.org, which goes to me and to Lindsay and to Jessica, and we'll answer any questions you have. But also, please submit questions now in the chat function. I see we already have some great questions on there, so I'm going to start running through some of those, and Callie and Lindsay and Jessica jump in. So I'll start with some of the eligibility ones. So this fellowship is designed for graduating law students and those up to 2 years out of law school. So someone asked about graduating in May 2018. You are eligible. So that's the standard eligibility is graduating in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But we have some flexibility about that. So if there's anyone listening who's a little bit before that, we'll consider your application as well. We're also launching on, have launched now on the Justice Catalyst, a mid-career attorneys fellowship, which is separate from this, but you can also submit on there if you're further out than that from law school. I'm going to answer some of the eligibility ones. LLM students are eligible to apply as well. There are sometimes visa issues to navigate around that, which we don't have expertise in, but we're happy to help if we can. But we will be relying on you mostly to know about your eligibility for visas. But yes, you're certainly eligible to apply for LLM students. Okay, so I'm going to do some of the easier ones first. What is the turnaround time for feedback on the prospectus? We try and respond within a couple of weeks. As we're approaching the deadline, we start to get an increased volume of prospectuses, and we can't always process them as quickly as that, but we try within a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit stretched out if you submit shortly before before October 13th, which is coming up. Okay. Another question, would you have examples of effective theories of change you've seen? We've seen a lot, and you can get some idea by looking at the past projects on our website, but we have people doing impact litigation, We have people doing damages cases against powerful private actors within unjust systems. We have movement lawyering. We have organizing. We have using powers of state and local government. We have policy advocacy. A wide range of different approaches. We love radical approaches of all different types. Power building within groups, know your rights trainings, and a dozen other things that I'm not thinking of right now. But so many projects of many different types, and the best way to know if something you have in mind might be one of them is to submit a prospectus. A question about citing sources. I think it case by case, really. So if you think it's a kind of something very well known, this isn't a law review article, you don't have to cite everything. But if it's something you basically use citations as you think they will be helpful to us as we review your application. I know you don't know what we know, but one or two effective hyperlinks, or you could also attach a source and additional materials, or if you want to try and use footnotes, which you could submit the whole prospectus or application as an additional document in a PDF, and then you can include footnotes if that's how you want to do it, or just include within parentheses or at the end of your thing, any way you want to cite, and no formality there, just helping us get a sense of the problem, and we can look at those additional things you reference to if it will help us there.
I'll jump in and answer a question, Jacob. There's one that says, from looking at past fellows, it looks like most are from Yale or Harvard or similarly elite law schools. Do you consider candidates from less elite law schools? Yes, we 100% do, and strive to have the most diverse group of fellows that we possibly can.
I'll just second that and say one reason. So we're, as Lindsay said right at the beginning, we're a relatively new organization. We started out by doing outreach to a small number of law schools in the first year or two that we knew and familiar with, but are really trying. Part of in fact the goal of the web, we did info sessions at some law schools, but that was me going, and there was a limit to how many I could go to. Part of the effort of the webinar is to try and spread the word more, so we have more applications from a wider range of law schools, and we're committed to as Lindsay said, a diversity of applicants, including diversity of law school. Let's see what. Yeah.
Also, another, can you apply to both the state and local government fellowship and the regular Justice Catalyst fellowship? Feel free to jump in if you have something else to say about this, but I think apply to the one or the other, and then we will tell you if we think that yours is actually a better fit for the other.
Actually, but that's if you have one project. If your project idea is to be at a state and local, or that's the main place you think it might be, then what Lindsay said. But if you have multiple project ideas, one of which will be based at a state and local government agency, and one of which will be based somewhere else, you can also submit prospectuses in both places. So that's if it's really one project, submit it in one or the other. But if it's multiple projects, you can submit in both. Let me see. So yes, our website mentions the projects can start during law school on a part-time basis. Can we elaborate on how that works? So some of this is dependent on rules that vary from law school to law school. But if your project has been selected, we would love to find a way for you to kind of begin working on it, presumably in your spring semester. Though you could apply as a 2L, and then potentially we might accept you and a year in advance. Then you might have a whole year to work on it, or a year and a half. but assuming that you're 3L, so if there's ways for you to kind of do it for credit in some way, that sometimes people find ways to do that in their law school, or we can sometimes provide some funding for people to work part-time while they're in law school towards their fellowship project. This would be separate from the fellowship salary amount, and that depends on rules of your law school as well. But that's one way that we can do that. So if you want to, if you would like to do that, or have a plan for working on it in the spring, you can let us know that in the application if you'd like, or just after you're accepted, either way, and we can find a way for you to begin on the work. A question about how many fellows there will be. We don't know exactly. Our first full class had about 10. Our class that's just started has more than 20. And we expect it to be somewhere in that range. We had some specifically, we got some additional funding specifically for immigration-focused fellowships. So we have quite a few this year, immigration-focused, that may be continuing next year as well, in which case that will be another larger class. If it doesn't continue, our class may go down a little bit, but it's in that kind of 10 to 20 range, is what you should be thinking about. Someone else asked, I'm hoping to work with a public agency, but was wondering if it would be too difficult to pursue my own project as such host organizations. Any advice? My very strong advice is to submit a prospectus to the joint Justice Catalyst Public Rights Project prospectus page form, because the folks at Public Rights Project are expert in navigating that question. It will, of course, depend on what which agency it is and where it is and who supervisors would be and so on. But Callie, maybe you could speak to that a little bit more. My sense is that there are often you will find the ability to, it has to be a project that they have some buy-in and are excited about as well. But if they are, they may well be able to give you significant leeway to pursue your own projects, even if both at government agencies and elsewhere, sometimes people, you have to chip in on other aspects of the work as well, but also with significant room to your own project. Callie, is there anything you would add to that?
I don't think so. I think that's a great overview, especially if by public agency, this person means state or local government. I think one of the benefits of applying through a program where you're getting outside funding is that you get to share with your host organization this application that you're building, and you have this sort of external source of pressure to help you keep the focus on your project and not just get swept up in whatever your public agency might be working on. But I really agree with Jacob that PRP can definitely not a reason not to pursue it.
We can also play a role in helping you if you have launched a project with a host organization and having trouble navigating that host organization. We can intervene and remind them that the fellowship was to do this project, and that we try and lean on them to keep you on track on the project and not drawn into other work as well if that's necessary. Okay, a question about character limits on the boxes on the prospectus. I believe those are hard limits in terms of the technology, but they're not hard limits in terms of the application. This is character limits, not word limits. Neither of them are hard. Those are both, the word limits are just kind of suggestions, not hard limits, and the character limits I think are hard. But if you want to go beyond that, I suggest that you put what you want to type into a PDF, and then attach in the additional materials, and in the prospectus box just say see additional materials, and that way you can go as long as you want. I wouldn't recommend submitting an enormously lengthy, if it's a 100-page prospectus, we may struggle to get through it all, but you can go over the limit. Next question, who is reviewing the applications and how open are they to supporting radical approaches to social change? E.g., would they be turned off by a project that is explicitly prison abolitionist? Should applicants tone down their proposals to make them more palatable to the reviewers? So I am one of the people who have used them, and we also have a committee that is not public who's on the committee, but we are not turned off by radical approaches. We're turned on by radical approaches to social change, and you should feel free to be prison abolitionists, to frame your project as a prison abolitionist project, or in any other radical way you want. That's a big part of our mission, is to support the radical projects that may not be supported by other places. So if it's a prison abolitionist project, or one that's building within that framework and building towards prison abolition, we want to hear about it, and we will not be turned off by that or other approaches that may similarly be seen as radical. If anything, the more radical, the better. The next question: I have multiple ideas. Would it be better to submit multiple prospectuses or just one with longer additional ideas section? I think if you have multiple ideas that are kind of equally, you're considering between them, as opposed to a main idea with some and a kind of a supplementary one, you could either submit multiple prospectuses or submit one prospectus and say I have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 ideas, and just number them and make as long as it's clear. I think that's the best way of doing it within a single prospectus. It's up to you. You could put it in the additional ideas section, or you could submit more than one prospectus. If you do that, indicate in the prospectus that this is your second or third, so that we know to kind of keep them, that we're looking at one person there. But I think the best way of all is one prospectus where you can lay out multiple fleshed out ideas within the prospectus text. And again, if it doesn't fit in the box, you do that as an attached PDF. I think that's the best way of doing that. So another question about how many fellows that I already answered. Do I have an idea about how many applicants there will be? I don't. We're hoping, as I said, we're expanding our outreach in various ways this year. It's hard to put exact numbers on it because there were people who did the prospectus or the fellowship or both last year, but a couple hundred people altogether, I would say, applied in that range. And I expect that to increase, partly because we're new and I think more people are learning about us, but we'll find out.